It all went down on January 3, 2026. Picture this. Caracas, Venezuela, a city accustomed to political drama, but not quite like this. In the dead of night, nearly 200 U.S. Special Forces descended on the capital. Their target, none other than Nicolas Maduro, the mustachioed strongman clinging to power. It was a scene straight out of a Tom Clancy novel, if Tom Clancy wrote novels where the main character was wanted for narco-terrorism. The operation was swift, clinical, and shockingly successful. Before anyone in his inner circle could sound the alarm, Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were in American custody, on their way to a date with a Manhattan federal court. This was not a subtle, diplomatic nudge. This was the United States kicking down the front door and dragging the president of a sovereign nation out in his pajamas. The world held its breath. This was a move so audacious, so brazen, that global fireworks seemed inevitable. For years, Venezuela had been the centerpiece of a new Cold War-esque chess game. In one corner, the United States, decrying Maduro as a dictator and a drug kingpin. In the other corner, Russia and China, propping him up with loans, weapons, and fiery speeches about sovereignty and anti-imperialism. Moscow and Beijing had positioned themselves as the great protectors of nations that dared to defy Washington. So, when U.S. troops physically nabbed their guy, everyone expected a thunderous response. Surely Russian ships would steam toward the Caribbean. Surely China would unleash a torrent of economic retaliation. The stage was set for a monumental showdown between superpowers. The initial announcement from the White House was just as bold as the raid itself. President Donald Trump, never one for understatement, declared that the U.S. would run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. It was the kind of statement that makes international law experts spontaneously break out in a cold sweat. This wasn't just an arrest, it was a hostile takeover. The capture of Maduro was the climax of a long, intense standoff, which had included fraudulent elections in 2024 and deadly U.S. attacks on Venezuelan-linked vessels in 2025. With Maduro now in U.S. custody, the world watched and waited for the other players to make their move. The question on everyone's mind was simple. What would Maduro's powerful friends do now? The expectation of a fierce reaction was entirely logical. Russia and China had invested billions in Venezuela. They had sold it jets and tanks. They had used their veto power at the United Nations to shield Maduro from international condemnation. They had painted a picture of a steadfast alliance, a brotherhood of nations united against American hegemony. This was their moment to prove that their promises meant something. This was their chance to show the world that when you have friends in Moscow and Beijing, you don't have to fear Uncle Sam. The raid in Caracas was a direct challenge, a gauntlet thrown down. All eyes turned east, waiting for the righteous fury of the supposedly wrong giants. The silence that followed was, to put it mildly, deafening. So, what did Russia and China do in response to their key ally being airlifted to a New York courtroom? Did they launch a daring rescue mission? Did they impose crippling sanctions on the United States? Did they, at the very least, recall their ambassadors and send a strongly worded letter written in all caps? No, they did something far, far less dramatic. They complained. Yes, that's it. They went to a United Nations Security Council meeting, wagged their fingers, and issued stern condemnations. They used words like unacceptable, violation of international law, and flagrant aggression. It was the international equivalent of leaving a one-star Yelp review for an invasion. All talk, no action. This response was, to be blunt, pathetic. Imagine your two biggest, toughest friends promising for years that they will have your back in any fight. Then, one day, a bully not only takes your lunch money but stuffs you in a locker. You expect your friends to show up and unleash hell. Instead, they just stand outside the locker and say, "We formally object to this locker stuffing incident." That was Russia and China's reaction in a nutshell. They offered zero military intervention. They provided no material support to challenge the U.S. presence in Venezuela. They didn't even organize a boycott. Their grand, powerful response was limited to diplomatic grumbling, which has roughly the same impact on U.S. foreign policy as a stiff breeze. The contrast between their past rhetoric and their current inaction was staggering. For years, both countries had used Venezuela as a symbol of their global reach and their commitment to a multipolar world. They had presented themselves as a reliable alternative to American partnership. They were the dependable allies, the ones who wouldn't abandon you for political convenience. Yet, when the ultimate test came, they failed spectacularly. Their bluff had been called. The US had made a move so aggressive that it demanded a real, tangible response, and Russia and China had nothing. Their roar turned out to be a pre-recorded sound effect, played at a disappointingly low volume. The message this sent to other smaller nations in their orbit was chillingly clear: you are on your own. All the treaties, the state visits, the military parades, and the grand speeches about eternal friendship mean absolutely nothing when push comes to shove. The United States calculated correctly that Russia and China's support for Maduro was a mile wide and an inch deep. They bet that when faced with a real crisis, Moscow and Beijing would prioritize their own stability and economic interests over some lofty ideal of socialist solidarity. And they won that bet. The paper tigers had been exposed, revealing that they were, in fact, just paper. This isn't the first time Russia and China have left a so-called friend out to dry. In fact, if you look back at history, their track record of abandoning smaller socialist or allied states is remarkably consistent. It's a pattern of behavior that should have been a giant, flashing red flag for Maduro. The Soviet Union, Russia's predecessor, famously left its allies hanging whenever the risk became too great. Think about the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, or the Prague Spring in 1968. In both cases, movements for reform were brutally crushed, and while the Soviets did intervene in Prague, their broader history shows a willingness to cut allies loose when it suits them, as seen in their cooling relations with countries that deviated from their strict ideological line. China, too, has a long history of prioritizing its own national interests over any sense of ideological brotherhood. Their dramatic split with the Soviet Union showed they were willing to abandon their most powerful communist ally over disputes of leadership and doctrine. Later, their brutal border war with Vietnam in 1979, a fellow communist state, was a stunning lesson in realpolitik. The message was clear. Ideology is a useful tool, but national interest is the ultimate master. China has consistently shown that its foreign policy is pragmatic and self-serving, not driven by romantic commitment to a global socialist cause. They are not in the business of charity, they are in the business of China. The Venezuelan situation is simply the latest and perhaps most blatant example of this trend. Maduro's government was a useful pawn for Russia and China. It gave them a foothold in Latin America, a region the US has long considered its backyard. It was a way to poke the American eagle in the eye and distract it from their own activities elsewhere in the world. They could sell weapons, secure oil contracts, and generally be a nuisance to Washington, all under the guise of supporting a sovereign government. It was a low-cost, high-reward arrangement, until the cost suddenly skyrocketed. The moment the US sent in troops, the calculation changed entirely. Suddenly, supporting Maduro meant risking a direct confrontation with the world's largest military and economy. It meant jeopardizing trillions of dollars in trade and investment. Faced with that choice, Russia and China did what they have always done. They chose themselves. They chose stability. They chose their wallets. The grand pronouncements of solidarity were revealed to be nothing more than empty words. For Maduro, it was a harsh and final lesson in the transactional nature of superpower friendships. He was a convenient ally, but he was never a true partner. When the bill for that friendship came due, Moscow and Beijing simply refused to pay. Let's be brutally honest about what really drives nations like Russia and China. It's not a deep-seated love for Karl Marx or a burning desire to liberate the proletariat of the world. It's money, it's business, it's cold, hard, economic interest. The supposed friendship between these giants and smaller socialist states like Venezuela was never about shared ideals. It was a business relationship, plain and simple. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, and both Russia and China were heavily invested in its energy sector. They loaned Venezuela billions of dollars, and those loans were being paid back with oil. It was a profitable arrangement that also happened to annoy the United States, which was a nice little bonus. But here's the thing about business. You have to manage risk. Propping up a volatile and collapsing regime like Maduro's was already a risky investment. The country's oil production had plummeted due to mismanagement and corruption, making it harder for Venezuela to pay its debts. When the United States physically removed Maduro from power and announced its intention to take over the country's oil industry, the risk profile of that investment changed overnight. Suddenly, continuing to back the old regime meant not only losing their initial investment, but also being completely shut out of Venezuela's future. It was a classic case of having to decide whether to cut your losses. For China, the world's factory, the decision was a no-brainer. Its economic relationship with the United States is the single most important one it has. Trillions of dollars in trade flow between the two countries every year. Risking that entire relationship to save one failed dictator in a country thousands of miles away would be economic suicide. It makes no sense to burn down your entire house just to keep one room warm. So, China did what any rational economic actor would do. It made a few angry noises for the cameras, and then quietly accepted the new reality. Protecting their access to the American market is infinitely more important than propping up a socialist ally. Russia's calculation was similar, though with a different flavor. Its economy is far more dependent on energy exports. A direct conflict with the US over Venezuela could lead to crushing sanctions that would cripple its ability to sell oil and gas on the global market. Furthermore, with the US now in control of Venezuela's oil, Russia saw a potential opportunity. Perhaps they could negotiate with the new US-backed administration to protect some of their existing assets. Antagonizing the US would close that door forever. In the end, both countries looked at the situation, did the math, and realized that their ideological friend was a liability they could no longer afford. Money talks, and in this case, it said, let Maduro go. Let's not get confused by all the talk of narco-terrorism and restoring democracy. While the US government used those phrases as the official justification for the raid, the real story can be spelled out in 3 letters. OIL. Venezuela sits on an ocean of it. And for years, that oil has been largely inaccessible to American companies. First due to Hugo Chávez's nationalizations, and then due to Maduro's catastrophic mismanagement. The US operation was not just about removing a dictator, it was about reopening one of the world's most significant oil patches for American business. The speed with which the Trump administration pivoted to this topic tells you everything you need to know about its true priorities. Mere days after Maduro was captured, the White House was already rolling out the welcome mat for big oil. President Trump announced that he wanted US companies like ExxonMobil, Chevron, and ConocoPhillips to go back into Venezuela and rebuild its crumbling oil infrastructure. He even claimed it would be cost-free for the US, funded by the country's future oil revenues. A bold statement that essentially means using Venezuela's own wealth to pay for its corporate takeover. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright was immediately dispatched to meet with oil executives, turning a military operation into a business development meeting. The mask of law enforcement slipped off to reveal the face of raw economic interest. This focus on oil explains why Russia and China were so quick to fold. They understood the game because they were playing it themselves. Their support for Maduro was always about securing access to that same oil. Once the US took control of the board, they knew that fighting for Maduro was a losing proposition. The better strategy, from their perspective, was to accept the new reality and try to negotiate a piece of the pie from the new management. Openly challenging the US would get them nothing. Quietly acquiescing might at least allow them to salvage some of their investments, or, at the very least, avoid further losses. They recognized that the prize was the oil, not the man sitting in the presidential palace. This is honestly the grim reality of international politics. Nations are not people, they do not have friends, they have interests. And when a country has something as valuable as Venezuela's oil reserves, it becomes a target for larger powers. The US, Russia, and China were all circling, and the US simply decided to stop circling and land. Stephen Miller, a White House official, put it in the starkest terms possible. The United States of America is running Venezuela. This wasn't about freedom or democracy, it was about control. Control of the government, control of the economy, and most importantly, control of the oil. The way the United States handled the aftermath of Maduro's capture was, honestly, a masterclass in ruthless pragmatism. Instead of installing a popular opposition figure, they made a deal with the devil they knew. They sidelined Maria Corina Machado, a respected opposition leader with high approval ratings, and even a Nobel Peace Prize, dismissing her because she lacked military support. This wasn't about finding the most democratic or beloved leader for Venezuela. It was about finding someone who could keep order and, crucially, would be compliant with American interests. They needed a manager, not a hero, and they found one inside the old regime itself. Their choice was Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who was quickly sworn in as interim president. On the surface, she condemned the U.S. raid as a brutal aggression, saying all the right things to appease her domestic audience. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. U.S. intelligence assessments concluded she was the best person to maintain stability. More telling, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was reportedly in constant correspondence with her new government. The U.S. wasn't just talking to her. It was using its leverage to ensure she played by their rules. By keeping a figure from the old guard in place, the U.S. avoided the chaos of a total regime collapse while ensuring the new leadership owed its existence entirely to Washington. This strategy effectively neutralized any potential for a truly independent Venezuelan government to emerge. By picking Rodriguez, the U.S. co-opted the existing power structure rather than trying to build a new one from scratch. It was a realistic decision, as one official put it, to align the country with U.S. interests as quickly and efficiently as possible. The message to the Venezuelan people was clear: your democratic aspirations are secondary to our strategic objectives. We will decide who runs your country, and our primary criterion is not your approval, but their willingness to cooperate with us. It's a cynical, but brutally effective way to manage a hostile takeover. This entire playbook, the raid justified as law enforcement, the sidelining of genuine opposition, and the co-opting of a regime insider, served to expose the hypocrisy at the heart of the operation. The U.S. claimed to be at war with drug traffickers, not Venezuela, yet it ended up running the country. It spoke of a judicious transition but installed an unelected leader from the very regime it called corrupt. It was a demonstration of raw power, dressed up in the flimsiest of legal and moral justifications. And it worked because no other power, namely Russia or China, was willing or able to call them on it. They owned the board, and they were rewriting the rules as they went. Amidst the geopolitical maneuvering of giants like the US, Russia, and China, it's easy to overlook the role of a much smaller player, Cuba. Yet, the events in Caracas revealed a crucial truth about the network of alliances surrounding Venezuela. When the U.S. Special Forces stormed Maduro's location, they didn't just encounter Venezuelan guards. The majority of the casualties on the defending side were Cuban. A total of 32 Cuban security personnel were killed trying to protect Maduro. This small but significant detail speaks volumes about who was truly committed to keeping the Venezuelan president in power, and who was just there for the business opportunities. Cuba's involvement wasn't about oil or massive loans. It was about survival. For decades, Venezuela under Chavez and then Maduro had been Cuba's economic lifeline. Venezuela provided Cuba with subsidized oil in exchange for doctors, teachers, and, most importantly, intelligence and security experts. The relationship was symbiotic. Venezuela's oil wealth kept the Cuban economy afloat, and Cuba's highly trained security apparatus helped keep the Venezuelan regime in power. The presence of Cuban guards willing to die for Maduro shows a level of loyalty that Russia and China, for all their bluster, never came close to demonstrating. Their commitment was ideological and existential, not just transactional. The fall of Maduro is therefore a catastrophic blow to Cuba. It's not just the loss of a political ally, it's the severing of an economic artery. The cheap oil will stop flowing, the financial support will vanish. The Cuban government now faces an existential crisis far greater than any it has faced since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Their loyalty to Maduro, demonstrated in blood, has left them isolated and vulnerable. They bet everything on a single horse. And that horse has just been carted off to a federal prison in Manhattan. Their sacrifice stands in stark contrast to the self-interested calculations of Moscow and Beijing. This highlights the different tiers of alliances at play. For Russia and China, Venezuela was a strategic asset, a piece on the global chessboard. For Cuba, it was a lifeline. This is why their response was so different. the Cubans fought and died because their own nation's stability was directly at stake. The Russians and Chinese just issued press releases because only their balance sheets were at risk. The tragic fate of the Cuban Guard serves as a grim footnote to the entire affair. A testament to a form of loyalty that in the cold, hard world of international relations is often punished instead of rewarded. They showed up for the fight, unlike the big brothers who had promised to do the same. One of the most cynical twists in this entire saga is the way the United States treated Venezuela's actual democratic opposition. For years, the US had publicly championed figures like Maria Corina Machado. She was the face of the anti-Maduro movement, a politician who had risked her life and liberty to stand up to the regime. She had won a fraudulent election in 2024 with a landslide of genuine votes, a victory that was stolen from her. She was even awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts. By any objective measure, if the goal was to restore democracy to Venezuela, she was the obvious and legitimate person to lead the transition. But when the time came, the US tossed her aside without a second thought. The official reason given was that she lacked military support. This is a stunningly candid admission. It reveals that the primary concern of the US was not popular will or democratic legitimacy, but raw power and control. They knew that a leader like Machado, with a real popular mandate, would be independent. She would be accountable to the Venezuelan people, not to the US State Department. She would likely demand a fair deal for her country's oil, not just hand over the keys to ExxonMobil. She was, in short, not manageable enough. Instead of backing the popular hero, the US made a backroom deal with a regime insider. By installing Delcy Rodriguez, a key figure from the very government they had just decapitated, the US ensured a smooth continuation of power on its own terms. Rodriguez had no popular base of her own. Her power came directly from the US's blessing and the remnants of the state apparatus. This made her completely dependent and therefore controllable. The US administration called this a realistic decision, which is a polite way of saying they prioritized their own interests over the democratic rights of the Venezuelan people. It was a betrayal of the very ideals they claimed to be upholding. This move effectively sidelined the entire democratic movement that the US had spent years pretending to support. It sent a clear message. We will use the language of democracy when it is convenient, but we will always prioritize stability and compliance. The Venezuelan people, who had bravely voted for change, were left with a new leader from the old system. One who was now taking orders from Washington instead of Havana. It was a cruel bait and switch. The promise of liberation turned into a simple change of management, proving that for the US, the Venezuelan opposition was just a tool to be used, and then discarded when a more convenient one became available. The capture of Nicolas Maduro in January 2026 will be remembered not just as a daring military raid, but as a moment of brutal clarity in international relations. It was the moment the United States called the bluff of its two greatest rivals, Russia and China, and they folded without even trying to see the next card. For years, Moscow and Beijing had built an image of themselves as the stalwart defenders of a new world order, a reliable counterweight to American power. They promised protection, solidarity, and a brotherhood of nations strong enough to stand up to Washington. When the moment of truth arrived in Caracas, that entire image shattered into a million pieces. Their response, a few angry speeches at the UN, and nothing more, was a public admission of impotence and self-interest. It proved that their alliances are not based on ideology or friendship, but on profit and convenience. As long as supporting a dictator like Maduro was a low-cost way to gain influence and secure resources, they were happy to play the part of his powerful friend. But the second the United States raised the stakes and introduced real risk, the risk of military confrontation and economic isolation, they abandoned him in a heartbeat. Their talk was tough, but their actions were cowardly. They showed the world that their promises are worthless when their wallets are on the line. The entire episode was a stark lesson in realpolitik. The United States acted with a brazen disregard for international law, but it did so based on a cold, accurate calculation that no one with the power to stop them had the will to do so. They knew that China's economic ties to the West were too valuable to risk over Venezuela. They knew that Russia, bogged down elsewhere and wary of sanctions, would not risk a direct conflict in the Caribbean. The US didn't just remove a dictator, it unmasked its rivals as paper tigers, all roar and no bite. They exposed the hollowness of the anti-American alliance for all the world to see. In the end, the story of Maduro's capture is a simple one. It's a story about how, in the 21st century, business interests trump political posturing every single time. Russia and China are not leading a new ideological crusade. They are corporations disguised as countries, ruthlessly pursuing their own bottom line. They talk about sovereignty and multipolarity, but their actions scream that only one thing truly matters: money. The United States called their bluff, and in doing so, revealed a fundamental truth of our time. When it comes to a showdown, even the biggest powers will choose profit over principle. And that is a lesson that smaller nations around the world will ignore at their peril.